Why brilliant minds feel cursed. The Jungian truth: there's a haunting paradox that often defines the lives of the most brilliant minds. They are admired for their depth, yet they feel isolated by it. They see further, think deeper, question more, yet this gift often comes wrapped in loneliness, confusion, and emotional turbulence. We tend to romanticize intelligence and insight as if they were purely blessings. But if we look closer, especially through the lens of Jungian psychology, we begin to see something more complex, even unsettling: that brilliance, when not integrated, can feel like a curse. And in today's world, where so many of us are waking up to deeper truths, this curse is spreading not because we're broken, but because we are awakening faster than we know how to handle. Carl Jung believed that the deeper mind, the unconscious, is not just a repository of forgotten memories, but a living, breathing force that shapes our lives. And when someone is born with a brilliant mind, it's not just about IQ. It's about depth of perception, sensitivity to nuance, and a capacity to hold paradox. These minds don't just see what is, they see what could be. They don't just notice patterns, they feel the emotional weight behind them. They don't just understand people, they absorb their hidden layers. But this gift comes with a cost, because when you see too much, feel too deeply, and think too far ahead, the world, at least as it is, can become unbearable. Many of us were told growing up that being smart is a blessing, but no one told us what it would feel like to be awake in a world that's asleep. No one warned us about the psychological pain of seeing through the facades people wear, or the burden of carrying questions no one else seems to ask. How do you live authentically when your truth makes others uncomfortable? How do you belong when your awareness isolates you? Jung called this the burden of consciousness. The more conscious you become, the more responsibility you feel toward truth, integrity, and meaning. But what happens when no one around you is speaking that language?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
This is where the curse begins. Not in the mind itself, but in the experience of being misunderstood. Brilliant minds often feel cursed, not because of their insights, but because of the silence that follows them. You try to share your thoughts, but they're met with blank stares. You ask deep questions and people change the subject. You express your fears and you're told you're overthinking. So slowly you start to retreat. You stop sharing. You turn inward. And that's where the spiral begins. The more you see, the less you say. The less you say, the more alone you feel. The more alone you feel, the more cursed your intelligence becomes. But here's where Jung offers a radical reframing. He believed that the pain of the brilliant mind is not a flaw, it's a rite of passage. It's the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are beneath the masks and roles and expectations. And individuation is not a comfortable process. It's a tearing away of illusions. It's the confrontation with your shadow. It's the realization that the very thoughts that isolate you are also the ones that will liberate you if you're willing to go all the way through. Ask yourself this: what if the heaviness you feel isn't a flaw in your personality, but a sign that you're carrying a deeper truth the world isn't ready for yet? What if your mind isn't cursed, but simply ahead of its time? What if your loneliness isn't proof that you're broken, but confirmation that you're on the edge of something profoundly real? Brilliant minds often feel cursed because they are not built for the surface-level conversations, the performative social rituals, the endless distractions that numb the world. They crave depth. They hunger for meaning. And in a culture that rewards conformity, that depth can feel like a defect. But it's not. It's destiny. And to walk that path is to become more than just smart, it's to become whole. Jung would say that the true task of the brilliant mind is not to escape its pain, but to integrate it, to bring together the light of intellect with the darkness of the unconscious, to descend into the chaos of the self, not to be destroyed, but to be reborn. And that process begins not with external success, but with internal surrender. The surrender to your own complexity, the surrender to your own questions, the surrender to your own truth, even when it isolates you. So I ask you this: can you bear the weight of your own mind without collapsing into despair? Can you sit with your insights without needing them to be validated? Can you allow your mind to be a mirror for the world, even if the world looks away. Because the curse of the brilliant mind only becomes a curse when it is denied, suppressed, or misunderstood. But when it is embraced, when it is harnessed, when it is honored, it becomes a gift beyond measure. It becomes a torch that lights the way not just for you, but for others who are still lost in the dark. You are not cursed. You are carrying a torch in a cave most people don't even know exists. And if you can keep walking, even when it's lonely, even when it's dark, you will discover something extraordinary, that your mind was never the problem. It was always the path. The depth that drowns and awakens. Why awareness without integration hurts so much. There is a moment in every thinking person's life when awareness begins to feel more like a weight than a gift. You start to see things no one else talks about: the quiet despair behind people's smiles, the internal contradictions in society's rules, the futility in chasing what everyone else seems addicted to. You notice the lies that we all agree to live by. You recognize the masks people wear, and worse, the ones you wear. At first, this heightened awareness feels like insight, but soon it turns into something else: overwhelm, paralysis, emotional exhaustion. You begin to ask yourself, why does knowing more make me feel worse? And this is where we arrive at one of the most painful truths that Carl Jung ever illuminated. Awareness without integration is not enlightenment, it's suffering. We often glorify awareness as the highest human achievement. Be more conscious, we're told. Wake up. But what happens when you do wake up, and instead of clarity, you find chaos? What happens when the veil lifts and you start to see the full spectrum of human contradiction, suffering, and illusion? Awareness by itself is not healing. It is simply exposure. It is the floodlight turned on in a room that's been dark for years. You see the dust, the cracks, the rot in the floorboards, but seeing it does not clean it. Awareness without integration is the beginning of the journey, not the end. This is why brilliant minds often drown in their own depth. Because they are flooded with perception but starved of structure. They feel everything. They notice everything, but they haven't yet learned how to hold what they see. Jung called this the confrontation with the unconscious. It's the point where your old identity, your ego, can no longer contain what your psyche is trying to reveal. And without a process to integrate that revelation, you start to fragment. You become hyper-aware, but emotionally dysregulated. You understand everything intellectually, but feel disconnected from yourself and others. You can analyze your trauma, but you can't feel safe. You can describe the wound, but you don't know how to heal it. This is the crisis of consciousness. And it's not your fault. In fact, it's inevitable. The deeper you go, the more you will uncover. But what no one teaches us is that seeing truth is not enough. You must digest it. You must metabolize it into your nervous system, your body, your everyday choices. Jung knew this. He warned against turning psychology into a purely intellectual exercise. He said that the task of individuation, the journey toward wholeness, requires not just knowing your shadow, but integrating it. Not just seeing your patterns, but living in new ones. Integration is the bridge between insight and embodiment. Without it, we are like philosophers lost in their own minds, drowning in meaning without ever touching solid ground. You can't think your way into healing. You have to feel. You have to live differently. That means making new choices. Saying no when your old self would have said yes. Allowing grief to move through you instead of explaining it away. Setting boundaries not just because you understand codependency, but because your nervous system finally believes you deserve peace. That's integration. It's the slow stitching together of what your awareness has torn open. So I ask you, what are you carrying right now that your mind understands but your heart hasn't caught up with? What have you seen that you haven't yet allowed yourself to feel? What truth do you acknowledge but still live in contradiction to? This is where the real work begins, not at the point of awakening, but at the point of embodiment. Not when you realize the world is broken, but when you begin to repair your own corner of it. Not when you learn the language of healing, but when you speak it through your actions, your relationships, your rituals. Awareness is the doorway. Integration is the walk through it. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it's slow. but it's the only way to transform the pain of your depth into the power of presence. Otherwise, your mind will keep racing while your soul stands still. You'll keep seeing truths that only make you feel more alienated, not more alive. You are not broken because you feel too much. You are not cursed because you understand what others don't. You are simply in the middle of the river between the shore of ignorance and the land of embodiment, and the current feels strong. But if you keep swimming not away from your awareness but into it, you will reach something extraordinary. Peace, not because you've stopped thinking but because you've started living what you know. The genius and the wound. Why the shadow holds the key to your brilliance. Most of us spend our lives trying to avoid the parts of ourselves that hurt. The shame, the insecurity, the fear, the unhealed trauma, we push it down, we distract ourselves, we rationalize it away. And in doing so, we unknowingly cut the cord to our deepest brilliance. Carl Jung said, "The gold is in the dark." He meant that the very parts of us we avoid our shadow hold the raw material for our genius, not in spite of the wound, but through it. And this is the truth that brilliant minds often resist the most, that their intelligence is not separate from their suffering. It is born from it. We are taught to separate intellect from emotion, to keep knowledge clean and clinical. But brilliance is not sterile. It's messy. It's forged in the fire of contradiction. The greatest minds in history did not rise above their pain, they descended into it. They looked directly into the abyss of their own psyche and brought back insight, language, art, and theory. This is the real function of genius, not to escape the human condition, but to transform it from the inside out. And that transformation begins with the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It's not something to kill or conquer. It's simply the unacknowledged, the parts of ourselves that were deemed unacceptable by others and eventually by ourselves. For some, it's rage. For others, vulnerability. For many, it's the belief that they are fundamentally unlovable. And that belief sits in the basement of the psyche, shaping everything. You can have the most brilliant ideas in the world, but if your shadow tells you that your worth is conditional, you will sabotage your own brilliance again and again. Jung believed that the integration of the shadow was not optional, it was essential for wholeness. And wholeness is not perfection. It's the union of opposites. It's when your light and your darkness no longer fight each other, but work together. When your intellect stops trying to overcompensate for your insecurity and starts learning from it. When your ambition stops covering your shame and starts healing it. That's when genius becomes embodied. That's when your ideas stop being abstract and start being alive. But this kind of integration demands profound courage, because facing the shadow means giving up the illusion that you're only your strengths. It means admitting that your intelligence has sometimes been a shield, that your independence may have grown from abandonment, that your kindness might be rooted in a fear of being disliked. And none of that makes you broken, it makes you human. But to access the full power of your mind, you have to stop running from your heart. The wound is the initiation. Every genius carries one. Some carry the wound of being unseen. Others carry the wound of betrayal, of rejection, of not being enough. And the wound speaks not always in words, but in compulsions, patterns, obsessions. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like withdrawal. Sometimes it looks like brilliance that burns too fast and crashes too hard. But always, underneath it all, is the call to come home. Not to the polished self, but to the true self, the one who doesn't need to perform to be worthy. So I ask you now, maybe more seriously than ever, what part of yourself have you been exiling in the name of being good, smart, or successful? What part of you did you bury so deeply that you forgot it was even yours? What if the key to unlocking your full brilliance is not doing more, but feeling more? Not thinking harder, but healing deeper? Because when the wound is faced, it becomes wisdom. When the shadow is embraced, it becomes power. And when the whole self is allowed to exist without shame or fragmentation, that's when true genius is born. Not the kind that wins awards or gets applause, but the kind that changes lives, starting with your own. You are not just here to think. You are here to become. And every shadow you integrate becomes fuel for that becoming. The genius and the wound are not enemies. They are twins. They grow together. And if you are brave enough to face the pain, you will find the gold. The unbearable light of knowing how to turn isolation into inner leadership. There is a kind of silence that brilliant minds know all too well. A silence that doesn't come from peace, but from distance, from standing too far ahead of the curve, from seeing things others don't see and trying to explain what can't be easily said. At a certain point, the curse of brilliance isn't just the weight of insight or the pain of emotional depth. It's the isolation that comes with it, the unbearable light of knowing. And the question becomes, how do you not collapse under that brightness? How do you carry the light when it feels like no one else sees the fire? Carl Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming your full self, requires separation. It requires leaving the collective patterns, the groupthink, the unquestioned norms. And that separation is lonely. Not because you want to be alone, but because the path you're on is yours alone. You're not following a script, you're writing one. And in that space between belonging and becoming, the silence can feel deafening. But what if that silence wasn't a punishment? What if it was a calling? We often mistake loneliness for failure. We think, if I were more relatable, I'd be accepted. Or, if I were less intense, maybe they'd understand me. But this kind of thinking is a trap, because the more you shrink yourself to fit, the more you betray the very light that makes you valuable. Jung said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." And that inferno includes the fires of solitude, the ache of being awake in a sleeping world, the sting of being seen as too much when you're just being real. But here's where something sacred begins to emerge. In that isolation, you start to realize something incredibly empowering. You don't need the world to validate your truth for it to be true. You don't need consensus to feel clarity. You begin to develop something rare and unshakable: inner leadership. The ability to lead yourself, to hold your own vision, to follow your own wisdom even when it's not popular or understood. And this is the turning point, when your isolation becomes your initiation. Inner leadership isn't loud. It isn't about control. It's about coherence. It's when your thoughts, your values, and your actions start to align, not because someone else told you what to do, but because you listened to yourself. You trusted your knowing. And that kind of self-trust is magnetic, not in a performative way, but in a grounded way. People begin to feel your presence before they even understand your words. You stop needing to explain yourself. You embody yourself. This is what happens when a brilliant mind stops trying to be understood and starts living in integrity. The isolation doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It becomes solitude. And in solitude, you find strength. You find clarity. You find the voice beneath all the noise. And that voice doesn't scream, it guides. It teaches you to hold paradox, to stay with discomfort, to walk through uncertainty without losing your center. So I ask you, as we close, can you be alone with your truth even when it's inconvenient? Can you hold your light even when no one else sees it? Can you lead yourself not because you have all the answers, but because you're finally willing to ask better questions? The unbearable light of knowing becomes bearable when you stop expecting others to carry it for you. When you realize that your insight is not a burden, it's a beacon. And yes, sometimes the brightest lights walk alone, but not forever. Because your courage to walk your path becomes a trail for others. Your honesty becomes permission. Your truth becomes a mirror. You are not cursed. You are called. Called to lead not the many but yourself. And that is enough. That is everything. Now go and carry your light.